sweet friends, and welcome back to the Quilter's Candy Shop, where you will find sweet treats for the discerning quilter. Today I have a skill builder tutorial for you that will take your future quilting projects to the next level. In my last tutorial, the Pixel Heart Quilt, I wanted to include step-by-step instructions for the webbing technique, but we just plain ran out of time. So today we are going to learn this valuable time-saving skill while making a very beginner quilt. You do not need a pattern for this quilt, but if you should like one, they will be available in my online shop at thequilterscandyshop.com. That's SHOPPE shop.com. First, a little setup for the quilt, and then we'll get right into the webbing technique. The pattern is called Buffalo Gal, and it is a play on the large Buffalo Check pattern that we are all familiar with in apparel and home decor. The key to creating a perfect Buffalo Check is 4 distinct values in your fabric choices. Now, they don't have to be monotone like what I'm showing you here, but they must have a distinct dark, medium, medium light, and true light to create the effect. To make sure my choices will work, I'm going to take a picture of the 4 colors side by side like this, and then I'm going to change. You just hit the edit button, and then you go to these little circles right here and slide this down and change it to mono. And so here you can see these colors are distinctly different. That super dark, super light, and then the 2 mediums are different from each other. This is the most important thing to get right in order for the Buffalo Check pattern to appear once you have your quilt put together. Here's a girl version I'm going to do as well. You want prints that don't have too much going on because it will distract from the effect. So simple blenders, small prints, tonals, calicos, or solids are usually the best. For our project today, you will need 4 one-yard cuts in the proper value range. You can make this quilt in any size you want with any size squares you like. Today we are going to make a good size throw, approximately 63 by 72 inches, using 5-inch squares. You can make this with 3-inch squares or 9-inch squares. You can make a baby quilt or a king-size bed cover. It just depends on what you want to make. Once you have chosen your 4 one-yard cuts, you're going to cut 7 5-inch strips width of fabric and then cross-cut those into 5-inch squares. 7 strips cut into 5-inch squares will yield 56 pieces per color. The traditional way to put a Buffalo Check pattern together is to make a 4-patch block using one of each of the 4 fabrics. Then make as many 4-patch blocks as you need to get the size quilt you want. If you want to assemble this quilt in the traditional way, you will need 56 4-patch blocks, all the same, and then assemble the blocks in rows of 7 across and 8 rows down. But today we're going to talk about webbing, which is a new term for chain piecing or assembly line sewing. Chain piecing is simply sewing many pieces at one time, one right after another, without cutting the thread in between your units. I first learned webbing way back. I can't remember if it was a Sewing with Nancy episode or an Eleanor Burns book or from a Marty Michelle presentation, but I've been using this technique for decades. And at the time, it was just called chain piecing. But webbing has suddenly made a comeback with its new name because that's what it looks like halfway through, like a web of squares all chained together. The first way I'm going to show you is the way I learned way back. We're talking more than 40 years ago. And I think it's still the way that most people chain piece their webbing. With both methods, you have to lay out your pattern so that you know where everything is going. You're going to be working in columns instead of in rows. And then always starting on the left side of your layout. In the first column and the second column, we're going to work together. And we're just going to take this piece and flip it over. Flip it over. Now, if I had a whole quilt laid out, you would do this process for the whole length of the quilt, but we're just doing a small section. And then you're going to pick up your top piece, your two pieces that are going to be sewn together, and pick it up and put it on top of the next piece like this, and you're going to go all the way down your quilt if you had a full layout. Right, that's stack number one. You're just going to leave that one right there. The rest of the quilt, all the way across your quilt and all the way down, are going to get picked up in order. You're always going to start at the top and on the left, and you're going to work in columns. And you're just going to put this down here like this. Now, if you have a really large quilt, some people call this column number 2. These two are already going to be sewn together. This is going to be the next column, so this would be column number 2. They put a 2 here and they pin this and they keep it separate. I don't do that. I just continue to pick up all the pieces. Being careful not to get these twisted around. You're going to pick them up and lay them down just like this, exactly all the way across. And it doesn't matter if you have 20 squares across and 50 squares down. You're just going to pick up the whole thing just like this all the way. Always keeping that registration, because see here I have one piece that is directional, and so you will want to make sure those stay. So here we go. And then the last row. Excuse me while I get in the way. All right, so this is the whole rest of your quilt in one stack, and this is your first 2 rows, right sides together, stacked on top of each other. Now we're going to go to the sewing machine. So the very first thing you're going to do is you're going to do just your first column, and you're going to take the top 2 pieces. So one more time, this is the very first part of the quilt. We flipped this over here, and we're going to sew this right hand side. So I'm going to get these 2 edges lined up. Don't lose track of which side is the seam side and which side is the top and bottom. And we're going to run this through. Nice 1/4 inch all the way. Now, if you have any experience chain piecing, most of the time you get right to the edge, so you have 1 needle stitch off the edge, so when you put the next one through, it butts right up against it. But in this case, we want a couple of little stitches of chain, so you want this, the end of your piece right here, to go all the way to the back of your presser foot. So I'm going to run this like that. Okay, that's going to give us a little room in between these because we're chain piecing. We are not going to cut this off. We're going to put this together. I'm sure most of you are familiar with chain piecing or assembly line sewing or whatever, but this is just a little bit different in the next step. So we just need that little bit of space in there. And see, I've gone all the way, a couple stitches off. Here's the next pair, just like that. Line it up. All right. And this is why I did a smaller section of the quilt top, because you don't want to sit and watch me sew 18 pieces in a chain. So now we're at the end. We're going to stop here and then grab your snips and take off your leader, ender, or your cottontail or your thread saver, and you're going to put it through. And now you're going to take your whole chain off. Now here's a critical part. Keep a hold of this end. Don't lose it. Because you're going to have to come all the way down here to the other end. And this can be a big pile. If you're doing a big long quilt, all this back here is going to be a big pile. But all you need is this first one right here. You're going to open it up, and here now we have our 1 pile and 2 pile. So now this one gets sewn right to there. And we're not going to cut anything apart. Now the reason I chose this Buffalo Gal pattern to show you this process is because you can't mess it up. In the Buffalo Gal pattern, this row is always going to be these 2 fabrics, every other one. There's nothing else that goes in between here. And the second row is always these 2 patterns, every other one. So if for some reason my next piece right here is not the one that goes on this row, it'll be really obvious. All right, so I'm going to line this up. And what I do is I just get this corner set up. I get that under get the needle in there, and then I clean up this corner. Line everything up, and then hold on to it and run it through. And so all you'd have to do is make sure you're getting the right connection between. So you don't want to pick up the wrong one. But again, if you pick up the wrong one, it's a good chance that you'll recognize it right away because we're doing this buffalo check, which is really easy. So I get this first corner all nice and neat lined up. Get my needle in it. Then I line up this corner down here. And so. All right, there's just one more in this line, so I'm going to open this. And look, when you're doing it like this, you know, people say, well, what if it gets twisted around? Okay, if it gets twisted around, but it's still, no matter how many times I twist it, it's still going to be like this. So it's not going to go crazy on you. All right, and with directional fabrics, just make sure you've picked it up in the right place. It's facing the right way. I get this top corner right here, lined up, needle in, line up the bottom till I'm happy, like that. All right, now we've only done 4 rows because I'm showing you a shortened version. So go back, snip your cottontail. Then snip off your chain. But don't lose this. This goes to the end, and you want to follow this all the way down until we get to the front. And then we're going to open this up and put on the next piece. It's really brainless. It's actually kind of fun. You can you can watch a movie or whatever because you don't have to pay so much attention. If you've done this layout correct, the whole thing is going to go together beautiful. Okay, I'm going to do this one more row and then I'll show you what it looks like. And you'll notice too, we are not doing any pressing in between. We don't have to do any pressing yet. This works on any size pieces as well, and any size construction. It gets a little bit to be a handful if you're doing, let's say you're doing 2.5-inch pieces and you're making a king size quilt. I mean, that might make it a little more difficult to handle all that. But this size, for this size quilt's very easy. This also works if you want to put, like in the pixel heart from last week, that 5x5 block, whether it was 5-inch squares or the 2.5-inch squares, this would have been perfect to set that up. And it is the way that I made mine. You just didn't get to see it. All right, I'm going to take my cottontail. Okay, now I'm just going to pull this out here so you can see. You can see how this looks like a web. You have a web because all of these pieces are connected this way, and it lines up your seam allowances perfectly here and here and here. Okay, so that's it. We just keep going, and I'm going to keep going, and I'll show you another picture when I get a little bit bigger piece of web so you can see, and then I'll show you how to press these units and put them together. So once you have all your patches sewn on, you still have it all chained together in the web. I like to put the bottom row here and the rest of the webbing away from me. So in the camera, I know it looks backwards, but you can see my directional little cute little squirrels here are facing me. So this is my bottom row, because all we're going to do is flip this over and nest all these seams together. But for me, it makes it easier on my brain if I go ahead and press this bottom row, because then I have a direction. So I'm just going to press all these seams going one direction. And it doesn't have to be a great press. It does need to be open, but it doesn't have to be perfectly pressed, because I'm just trying to get my seam allowances in one direction so that when I go to nest, yeah, that looks pretty good actually. When I go to nest this row onto this row, this will give me a little starting direction, and I'll know all of these seam allowances are going to go one way, which means the seam allowances on the other side have to go the other way. All right, so I'm doing a quick job here, and really that's all you need. Just like that. And in mere 30 seconds, we've got 14 patches, seam allowances, all pressed one direction. Now, I'm going to take this bottom row and flip it onto the next row up. And if you want to take the time to put pins in and get all these lined up, you can, but it's really not necessary, because you're going to work intersection by intersection and get all these nested. So I'm going to take this right to the machine like this. So this would be your view. Take this right to the machine. I'm going to start here. I'm going to sew down, and I know these are going down, so I know these have to go up, and I can just feel that nesting right there, and then sew to the next one. So that's what I'm going to do next, and I'll show you what that looks like. So here's my folded over row, and again, we're going to line up this corner right here and get it started. Now with just my needle down and stopped right there and secure, I'm going to nest this seam. Because I pressed this, I know this seam allowance goes down, so this seam allowance goes up. I push that up underneath, get it nested, and you can feel that with your fingers, and then get it lined up and hold it. Keep that from slipping all the way right up to there. Now that's secure with the needle down, and I will nest the next seam. So I use my finger here to fold up. I don't know if you can see. I use this finger to fold up that seam allowance underneath. My thumbs to get this all budged up against each other here and nested. And if you're concerned about it, you can just stick a pin. Like I have a little extra fabric in here, so I might just stick a pin so I've got something to work against. And that will allow me to ease this in where I need to. Just want you to see, you know, how I manipulate. I stick my hand right here in between these two webs, and I'm flipping this seam allowance under, and sometimes you gotta lick your fingers. I know some people think that's gross, but I lick my fingers because that's the best grippy. Spit is the best grippy stuff there is. All right, keep moving along. Okay, here we are at the end. You saw I cut my cottontail off of the lead end, and I'm snipping it off here. And now here, this is perfect because now I have 14 rows here. Once you snip your cottontail, hold this end and follow the seam all the way back to the other end. This is your chance to check your intersections and manage your seam allowances. This is not as critical when you're sewing your rows together, but it is definitely critical when you're sewing your patches together, because if you get something turned around, it's going to screw up your pattern. Okay, let's go to the ironing board. Okay, and here is my row. Now again, what I do is I put this bit that I'm working on closest to me, and the rest of the webbing is out here. And just going to take and set this seam just like normal. So set this seam along here. This is the open edge that we sewed. All the webbing is out here. And I gave this a setting press. And now we open this up like this. And I go ahead and press this. Now, since you're going to be nesting all the seams, it's really nice to have this row set so that you know what to do with this row. Just like we did before, I pressed this row, then we sewed it together. Now I'm pressing this row, and when we go to flip this over onto here, these will be pressed, and it'll make it easier to know which direction to put these rows. It's a way to have it not have to be such a puzzle. And while this whole process seems just a little bit complicated, once you do it a few times, I'm telling you, you are going to love it. Okay, so now I've got this. I'm going to clean this up so you can see. This is my bottom row. We've sewn it here. So now all I do is flip 2 rows over like this. I'm going to take this to my machine, and I'm going to sew this row just like I did. You can do it with no pins. You can sit here and pin all of these and then sew it, or you can do a combination where you nest as many as you like, and if you're having an issue, just pin the one. And you know, sometimes I do that because if I've got a square that needs a little bit of easing, then having that pin helps. But otherwise, that's it. That's the whole process. I'm going to go ahead and finish this piece, and then I'll show you what it looks like on the table. Okay, and here it is. I got all of my rows put together and all of my columns put together, and I love how this Buffalo Gals pattern comes out. So this is how quickly you can make a quilt using the webbing technique. Now, let me show you one more way to chain piece using a new webbing technique that I think is even one step faster. I guess you could call this the updated version of webbing. Like I said, I've been webbing forever, but when I saw Mary Mabel Market set up her webbing, it just clicked for me. I had to try it, and I liked it. So I have updated my process. Now, I don't do it exactly like her, but she was definitely my inspiration for updating this old technique. This technique requires we bring out the koala pin cushion because it takes a lot of pins. This technique can be utilized for long rows all the way across the top, and it can be used for independent blocks. But for our quilt here, I'm going to do just this one corner of the Buffalo Gal quilt, which is 8 squares across, and I'm doing 4 squares down because that's what fits on my table. But this way you can see the process up close. Lay out the squares exactly how you want them to appear. This is the same starting process as the other form of webbing. But this time we're going to start at the bottom of the rows on the left-hand side and flip and pin squares. Let me show you. So you're going to start on your left, you're going to start at the bottom, and you're going to take the next square that's on the right, flip it over, take a pin, and pin it. It doesn't have to be a precise pin. You do want to pin from the bottom, and I'll show you that later. So pin from the bottom up, flip it back over, take the next piece, flip it on top, pin, flip it over, and this is actually quite a quick process. You just stick it on there. You do not have to take the time to match these edges up. We're just placing and securing the position of the blocks in the row. We're not matching them up here. Get a few more pins close by. And flip it back over. Grab a square, pin it, flip it, grab a square, pin it, flip it. All right, and this whole row is pinned together. So I'm just going to leave this one right here, and then we're going to do the next row. So starting on the left, take the next square that's on the right, flip it, pin it, flip it, next square, flip it, pin it, flip it, next, and you can see the pattern. And you're just going to do this with the whole row. I'm going to get down to this one so I can show you what happens next. I know this is very unconventional, but I'm telling you, somehow it's going to save you a couple of steps. I'm not sure why it takes so much less time, but it does. So next square, flip it, pin it, open, flip it, pin it, and open. Okay, now I've got this row is pinned. So this is our bottom row. This is the second row from the bottom. You're just going to pick this up and set it right on top of this row. Don't worry about it. Just keep moving on. So starting on the left, flip it, pin it, open. Flip it, pin it, and see I'm pinning from the bottom up. Open. All right, I'm going to get these next two rows together. And don't take a bunch of time on this because it's not, this really part is not important. It's the next step where everything comes together. And there's the last square of this row. Open that up and you're just going to lift and stack it right on there. You do have to make sure you get both layers of the fabric, otherwise your pinning is not going to do any good. All right, and there's my last row. Open it up. I'm going to set it right on top of this row. And now this whole stack is going to the machine. And here is my stack. You would do your whole quilt, the full width and the full length, stacked like this. So what's going to be on top is the very first row of your quilt, and what's going to be on the bottom is the bottom row of your quilt. And it doesn't matter if this gets jumbly because it's all pinned. It's all going to hold together. And the first thing you're going to do is flip this fabric back, grab this pinned piece right here, bring it over to the machine. And I just take out the pin and do just like before. I match up this corner, get it under the machine, couple stitches in, then I match this corner down here, and sew a good 1/4 inch. Now, just like with all chain piecing, we're going to leave this piece in here and move this whole row out of the way. Flip the next row, flip over, Remove the pin. This is why you pin from the bottom up, because if it's here, it is so hard to get the pin out. So if you pin from the bottom up, it pulls right out and you can remove it. Line up the top corner, get it underneath, line up the bottom corner, and sew. Again, we only have 4 rows here to do, so I'm going to do all 4 so you can see. Put it up here, pull out the pin. Line up the top. Move the whole row. And this is my bottom row, but essentially I would have done like maybe 15 rows instead of just 4 if it was my actual quilt. And you'll get the hang of it. When you get to the end, you're going to grab your starter. What do they call it? Leader, ender. I call it a cottontail. I think that's a cute name. Or a thread saver. That's a very common name. And then snip it off. And I wasn't clear before, but one of the main reasons you hold on to this end and you go along here while you're pulling this to the other end is you need to check to make sure you haven't dropped a stitch or missed a patch or something. You want to make sure they're all connected. So this is the way you do that. Then lay it all out here again. And now you've got this sewn edge that's towards you. All of your pinned pieces are out here. And you're just going to move this forward and grab the next pinned piece. I think the reason this technique is a little faster is all the pieces are in place. You don't have to reach from your pile and get the next piece. You're just pulling up one that's already put in place. It does take a little bit of setup, but it's not that much more time than stacking all your pieces. So it's really kind of equal. I guess maybe this one just feels faster. I don't know, but I sure do like it. And it works for me, but you can do the style that works for you. This is another, make sure you're going to the very next connection. You don't want to skip a set of squares. That'll kind of throw you off a little bit. But if you do miss a set of squares, it's not that hard to fix. And there you go. I know it looks like a hot mess and it feels a little bit like a jumble, but once you've done this a couple of times, you're just gonna fall in love with it. I promise you. I really encourage you to give this a try. Okay, get my now, since I mentioned it, I think I'm going to show you what happens if you do miss a row. So, of course, I'm going across like this and everything looks fine. So, in this next bit of sewing, I'm going to purposefully miss a piece. And then you can see how to fix it. So I should do this one, but let's just say it was a little tucked under like this in the pile. And I grabbed this one instead, which, to be real honest, I have done once or twice. That is why I know how to fix it. Reset. All right, I feel like I've done such a beautiful job. I'm going to go on to my next set. And so I snip this and I start going back on this seam, going across, and uh-oh, see that? Oh, it's like, oh man, I missed that one. No worries. Just cut this part apart. This one connection where you've got your missing section, cut that apart. Stick the one in that is done properly, and you can just lift your needle, stick it in here, and I just sew a little bit onto that piece. Then I follow this connection. Oh shoot, how did I miss that one? Well, I'll just do it right now. Pull these pieces together. And then I get this one that I've already sewn properly. I'm just going to sew onto it. And maybe take a back stitch and then come off with my thread saver. And now when I go across here, there it is. I've added it in right there. And just pick up the whole thing and let those pinned parts dangle so they're out of the way, and then you go on to the next step. All right, I'm going to get this all together and I'll show you what the web looks like. It's going to look exactly the same as the other one once all the pieces are together, but we'll talk about that in a minute. And here we are back to the ironing board. Now, pressing and assembling the rows is exactly the same as what I showed you on the blue Buffalo Check. The only difference between these two processes of chain piecing is the setup. On the first one, we stacked all the pieces vertically. And on this one, we did the pin and flip method from the bottom up. That's it. I'm going to put these rows together and then we'll look at the finished product. And here they are, a perfect pair. These are going to make great porch quilts, picnic blankets, or something to lay on the ground to watch fireworks. For the blue colorway, I have chosen this dark navy mini buffalo check, and for the red colorway, the same thing. I think it's a little ironic, and I think it's cute. Along with the Buffalo Gals pattern, we will make available the Buffalo Boy and the Buffalo Girl quilt kits for your convenience. You can find them in our online store at thequilterscandyshop.com. That's SHOPPE shop.com. Thank you so much for watching our webbing tutorial. I hope you learned something new today, and I hope you will give this new webbing technique a try. Let me know in the comments if you think this slick trick will work for you. And if you would please take a second to give this video a thumbs up. It really helps our content get out to more people who might like to learn a fantastic technique like this. Don't forget to subscribe so you know when we post another fabulous video. Now, go sew something sweet. Bye!